Okay, now we're moving on to the first session of our day. And it's a subject that I'm very, very passionate about. In Victorian Britain, the most dangerous years of your life were your first few. In Manchester, Salford, Rochdale, the great industrial towns and cities of the north, children often didn't live to see their 5th birthday. Malnutrition was rife, and diets lacked the fats and proteins needed to build strength. And for the poor, a simple illness could become a death sentence. Now, the Cooperative Wholesale Society knew the impact of poor food quality all too well. And they did not believe, as was common, that poverty was a natural condition. They believed it was a systemic failure, a failure they could and must fight. So through their stores, through their supply chains, and through the tireless work of the Women's Guild, the Co-op committed itself to securing good, affordable, nutritious food for working people. They knew that without better diets, there could be no better futures. But the challenge was enormous. The cost of transporting food from abroad was too high. Liverpool's docks and railways held a monopoly, pushing prices beyond the reach of the poor. So they acted strategically. They thought as business people and as revolutionaries. They realised that to change lives, they had to change the market. They needed to break open supply chains and bring affordable goods directly to working class communities. Now, the question of how to get cheap animal fats into children's diets was answered by Denmark's butter and bacon. So the cooperative movement backed the construction of the Manchester Ship Canal and bought the shipping lanes. They were opposed by powerful interests and they were mocked in the press. It was seen by many as a folly. Powerful interests tried to stop it. Liverpool's dock owners fought tooth and nail to defend in Parliament their monopolies. The railway companies, threatened by the loss of freight traffic, lobbied against it at every turn. And the investors in London dismissed it all as a fantasy, refusing to back what they called Manchester's madness. To be fair, it sounds like the HS2 of its time, doesn't it? Punch magazine mocked us. We might have a slide of Punch magazine calling us Manchester, Sur la Mer. They thought that we were mermaids. Even those at home were warned that the burden of debt could cripple the city for generations. Yet those visionaries pressed on because they understood that injustice would not yield without a fight. So in 1894, the Manchester Ship Canal opened a vast new artery linking the ocean to the heart of industrial England. It was a bold vision, and as Steve says, they didn't wait for permission. They made a new way forward. Because building a better world demands more than good intentions. It demands courage and resilience and the willingness to overcome fierce resistance. The canal wasn't just a feat of engineering, it was a feat of solidarity, of innovation, of strategic cooperative thinking, and it saved lives. So this year, as we celebrate the UN Year of the Cooperative, under that theme of cooperatives building a better world, we must ask ourselves, will we be as bold and as strategic and as fearless in facing the injustices of our time? This is an example from our past, and in a moment I will give you a global challenge from our present. And as before, though, I say to you, we will only solve it together with solidarity and with strategic courage to build a better world once again. Today, we face a new kind of systemic injustice, one just as powerful and certainly just as dangerous, and that is the monopolisation of technology. A world where a handful of corporations and indeed individuals control the platforms that shape our economies, our politics, and even our friendships. These companies extract our data, profit from our attention, and too often amplify division and hatred for the sake of engagement. If the users of Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, owned and controlled the platform that it sits on, would we have algorithms of hate, barriers to access, polarisation? I think not. Technology is the systemic challenge of our age. But to really tell you how tech is exploiting our existence, we've invited our next guest, whose book, The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation, is classed as the Big Tech Assembly Manual. I think many of you in the room have been anticipating this keynote, and Cory will lay down the challenge before our panel talks about what we can do as a movement to tackle this global challenge. Please put your hands together for Cory Doctorow.
Thank you. Hi, pleasure to be here today, but I come with some grim tidings. I'm here to tell you that we are living through an era I call the Inshitocene. It is a great enshittening in which all the digital platforms that we rely on for so much are turning to shit. I call this inshitification, and both the big idea that describes inshitification and my sweary little word seem to have found some broad appeal. The American Dialect Society made it their word of the year, and then Australia's Macquarie Dictionary made it their word of the year, and then the New Scientist made it their word of the year, and just a few weeks ago, Webster's Dictionary included it in the dictionary. So what's inshitification? In inshitification, platforms follow a characteristic three-stage pattern of decay. In the first stage, the platforms are good to their end users, but they're also seeking a way to lock those end users in. So for example, when Facebook started, Mark Zuckerberg had a marvelous pitch for us users. If we would only leave MySpace, which after all was owned by a crapulent, spying, evil Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, we could come to Facebook, a platform that promised us it would never, ever spy on us, where all we needed to do was tell the platform who we wanted to follow, and then the platform would show us the things that those people posted. Tech platforms have many ways of locking us in. You have Uber, for example, which spent $31 billion of Saudi royal investment money, losing 41 cents on every dollar it made for 13 years, until it had driven the minicabs out of business, crashed investment in transit, and then turned around and doubled the price of a ride while halving the wages of its drivers once it was the only game in town. But Facebook didn't have to do anything that sophisticated or expensive to lock us in. We locked ourselves in on Facebook through something called the collective action problem, which is what economists say when they want to tell you that you love your mates, but they are a gigantic pain in the bum. If you and the 6 friends that in your group chat that you came with here to Rochdale can't agree on where you're going to go for drinks after the Congress, how are you and 200 friends on Facebook ever going to agree on when it's time to leave and where you should go? Especially if some of those friends are on Facebook because that's where their rare disease support group meets, and others are there because that's where they and the parents of their kids' five-a-side football league gather to organize their carpools, and still others are there because that's the only way to keep in touch with the people they left behind when they emigrated, and more are there because that's where their customers or their audiences are. And so long as you all love each other more than you hate Mark Zuckerberg, you will hold each other hostage on Mark Zuckerberg's platform. Now, once we were locked into Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg could make life worse for all of us, but not out of sadism, although perhaps he is a sadist, but rather to make things better for his business customers. And that's stage 2 of inshitification, when things are made worse for end users to make things better for business customers. In stage 2, Mark Zuckerberg turned to his investors and said, do you remember when we told these numpties that we were never going to spy on them? Obviously, that was a lie. I spy on them from asshole to appetite, and for pennies, I will allow you to target ads to them with exquisite precision while subsidizing a massive anti-ad fraud effort that makes sure that every time you give us $1 to target an ad to a specific person, that kind of person sees your ad. Then Mark Zuckerberg, he went to the publishers and he said, do you remember when I told these Muppets that I was only going to show them the things that they asked to see? Obviously, that was a lie too. If you put excerpts from your service, from your platform onto mine, with links directing people back to your website, I will, on your behalf, non-consensually cram those excerpts into the eyeballs of people who never asked to see them, and they will flood your site with traffic, and you will make money from them. And so the advertisers and the publishers piled into Facebook, and they got taken hostage too by us. They became dependent on our attention and our clicks, which meant that now it was time for phase 3 of enshittification, which is when Facebook claws all the value back from end users and from business customers, from publishers, advertisers, and us to give it to Facebook's executives and shareholders. Until today, the quantum of material in your feed that represents things you've actually expressed an interest in has dwindled to a kind of undetectable homeopathic residue, leaving behind a void that can be filled with things that people will pay to show you. But the advertisers aren't getting a great deal either. They're paying more for ads that are being targeted with less fidelity. And the amount of ad fraud on the platform is now through the roof. So Procter & Gamble zeroed out its $100 million per year programmatic advertising spend. Programmatic advertising, that's the euphemism the industry uses when they mean surveillance and advertising. So Procter & Gamble zeroed out $100 million worth of annual advertising spending and saw a 0% reduction in sales in the years that followed, because to a first approximation, every ad that they were paying to display was falling victim to ad fraud. Meanwhile, publishers are now having to pay to boost their content, even to get it shown to their own subscribers. And if they dare to put a link back to their own website on their articles on Facebook, those articles are then suppressed on the grounds that maybe it's a malicious link, but it also means that the only way they can monetize their content is by using Facebook's rigged, dodgy ad marketplace. So that is enshittification. Stage 1, be good to end users. Stage 2, make things worse for end users, but be good to business customers. Stage 3, lock everyone in, withdraw all the value, and collapse. Leave behind a wreckage that has just enough utility to keep everyone locked in. Now, we've seen versions of this across many of the platforms that we rely on: Google, Amazon, iPhones, Uber rides. Everywhere you look, services that we once valued because they delivered a good experience for our money are now cursed with becoming deliberately, unbearably awful, and yet we are still locked into them and we still stick around. Now, there are many kinds of service that have gotten worse. It's not just technology, but technology has a secret weapon when it comes to being made worse. And that is the flexibility of digital computers. Computers, after all, are famously brilliant at automating tedious, labor-intensive tasks. So when parts of the business are digitized, it is possible to automate a kind of labor-intensive, high-speed shell game that allows the business to alter the underlying logic of your interactions with it every time you visit it. The prices, the costs, the search rankings, the recommendations are different for every user every time they interact with technology. So we have Amazon. This is a firm that currently makes $56.2 billion per year selling off the top results in their search ranks. So the top result when you search for something on Amazon is not the best result for your search. It is the result whose manufacturer or seller has paid the most to be in that top result. And they pass the cost of that advertising onto you, the purchaser. On average, the first result on an Amazon search is 29% more expensive than the best match for your query. The top row is 25% more expensive than the best match for your query. On average, the best match for your query is found about 17 places down in an Amazon search. I call this continuous shuffling of prices, costs, search rankings, and recommendations twiddling. And anywhere you find digitization, you find twiddling. Take an industry that's not a tech industry, but has gotten tech in it. The nursing industry in American hospitals. American hospitals rely heavily on contract nurses because if you hire nurses on daily or weekly short-term contracts, you can hire them as backstops and not have to pay them the union wages that your regular nursing staff have. Now, it used to be that contract nurses used one of several regional nursing staffing agencies that were available all across the country, but those agencies have all been obliterated by 3 national gigantic apps, each of which bills itself as Uber for nurses. Now, before a nurse is offered a shift by one of these apps, the app goes to a data broker and looks up the nurse's credit history. And if that nurse is carrying a high amount of credit card debt, especially delinquent credit card debt, they are offered a lower hourly wage for their shift on the grounds that people who owe a lot of money are more desperate and will work for less. Now, the imperative for bosses to exploit desperate workers is not a modern phenomenon. But what is new is the ability to automate the discovery of how vulnerable a worker is and to calculate the wage based on that desperation. The bosses who went to London to import Napoleonic war orphans to work in the dark satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution would have happily done this to nurses too, but they just could not hire enough sort of Bob Cratchit-esque scribes to labor over giant ledgers to recalculate everyone's wage over and over again. If you add computers to the mix of any business, suddenly the tedious, labor-intensive task of calculating worker desperation is something that can be solved in an eye blink by a computer. And that is the real AI labor threat. Not that AI can do your job. I mean, obviously, an AI salesman can convince your boss to fire you and replace you with an AI that can't do your job. And clearly, an AI boss can convince your prime minister to give up on any hope of producing a productive economy and instead sinking all of your public finances into energy-hungry, water-guzzling AI data centers. But the real AI labor threat is that your boss can use AI algorithms to twiddle your pay packet from moment to moment to keep you balanced on the knife edge of desperation, exploiting an information advantage to pay you the least that you will accept, calculated in real time to the penny. Now, enshittification is breaching out of the realm of digital and entering our physical realm, wherever we find digitization of a hard goods business. Now, obviously, the co-op has a grocer. In Norway, grocers have been overtaken by e-ink shelf tags that can display a new price whenever someone presses a button in the back office. And in Norway, grocers on average are altering their prices 3,000 times a day. And sure, they say that they're doing this to make yesterday's milk and this morning's lettuce a little cheaper in the hopes of moving it before it spoils, but they can also continuously, undetectably alter prices based on their estimation of your willingness to pay. And in the absence of some constraint on that impulse, we should expect that they will. When an app decides to pay you less for your labor than the next worse over, they are saying that your labor is worth less than the next worse over. And when an algorithm decides to charge you more than the next person who walks into the store, they are saying the pounds in your pocket are worth less than that person's pounds. So what is it that constrains a firm that feels this temptation to enshittify? After all, there was a time not so long ago when digital services won our custom by actually being good, by delivering value, by having delightful experiences, by being convenient. And then they all stopped, all at once. So what changed? What happened to the environment to make it so enshittigenic? How did we get enshittification? Well, one constraint that we lost was competition. Generally, firms that fear losing your business or your labor to a rival will treat you better, sharing more value with us at the expense of shareholders and executives. What happened to competition? 40 years ago, starting with the Reagan, Thatcher, Cole, Mulroney years, the West all but abandoned enforcement of competition law. They allowed predatory pricing. They allowed preferential discounting. They allowed out-of-control mergers, even when CEOs explicitly stated that the merger they were entering into was for the purpose of reducing competition, which is how you get a company like Google, where they spend $25 billion per year to buy every search box everywhere you might find it, so that irrespective of operating system, carrier, or browser, every search box you type a query into is wired into Google's servers, meaning that no new search engine will ever get a foothold. Google is a company that has not shipped a successful product that they developed in-house this century. Google is a company that had exactly one great idea in 1998, a really good new kind of search engine, and since then practically everything they have built in-house was a failure. Google does not innovate. They rely on buying other people's companies in order to expand. From ad tech to video streaming, from mobile operating systems to server management, from navigation to document collaboration, Google is not Willy Wonka's idea factory. They are rich Uncle Pennybags spreading their money around, buying out everyone with an ounce of creativity. Now, this pattern is not limited to Google. All of tech is built on sleazy anti-competitive tactics. Take Mark Zuckerberg, who said in writing in a memo that went company-wide, "It is always better to buy than to compete." Our supine regulators allowed the internet to merge to 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. And that neutralized the discipline that markets impose on firms, the fear of defecting workers and customers. But it didn't just neutralize market discipline, it neutralized the state discipline too. Regulation, the discipline applied by governments, is only possible in the absence of cartels. When an industry collapses into a cartel, a duopoly, a monopoly, its leaders easily converge on a set of policy priorities that they can push in the halls of power. And since they're no longer engaged in wasteful competition, they are a slosh in money that they can spread around to make those priorities into policy. Remember those American nurses whose wages are discounted by the amount of credit card debt that they hold? That process is only possible because in America, privacy is a dead letter. The last time the American Congress passed a national consumer privacy bill was in 1988, when Ronald Reagan signed the Video Privacy Protection Act, a law that bans video store clerks from telling the newspapers which VHS cassettes you have. That is the last technological privacy threat that the US government has bestirred itself to address. And the reasoning behind this is no mystery. It is the expensively procured inaction of an industry that has found an endless variety of ways to monetize human rights violations at scale. So data brokers are out there flogging every intimate fact of every person's life to anyone who's got 2 pennies to rub together. And before you start feeling smug about those backwards Americans, and I should note here that like all the best Americans, I'm a Canadian. We are very smug. Remember that with the new Data Use and Access Act, Starmer's government has rolled back UK compliance with Europe's privacy law, the GDPR. This is a privacy reversal that not Johnson, nor May, nor Sunak, not even Liz Truss could manage. And Starmer also in January fired Marcus Bokerink, the extremely effective head of the UK Competition and Markets Authority. And he didn't just fire him, he replaced him with Doug Gurr, whose last job was running Amazon UK, and who is now in charge of tech competition watchdogging. This is regulatory capture, distilled to a form so pure, so crystalline, that you could use it to cut diamonds. Tech is not unique in freeing itself from the discipline of competition and regulation. Every industry in every sector has cartelized into global oligopolies of 5 or fewer firms. Glass bottles, eyeglasses, financial services, vitamin C, athletic shoes, mattresses, and of course, professional wrestling. But tech is uniquely subject to 2 other forces of discipline that once acted as a check on the enshittificatory impulses of tech bosses. Now, the first of those other tech-specific disciplining forces is the tech workforce. The tech workforce singularly lacks in unions, but has nevertheless historically been very powerful because tech workers are both scarce and very productive. The American National Bureau of Economic Research published a paper calculating that the average tech worker adds $1 million to the bottom line of their employer. So tech workers have been historically in very short supply, very valuable to their bosses, and their bosses fell all over themselves to find ways to keep those tech workers happy. They transformed tech workplaces into whimsical campuses with gourmet canteens, kombucha on tap, free massages, and a surgeon on call who would visit you and freeze your eggs so you could work through your fertile years. Now, this worked. Tech workers had heaps of power, and they flexed it for all kinds of things, but they never flexed it to demand any kind of personal life. Instead, they were sold the myth that they were a new generation of warrior monks tasked with the holy job of bringing in a new, better digital era, which meant that they had to work every hour that God sent, sleep under their desks, and ship to their bosses arbitrary deadlines. But while that self-mythologizing helped motivate powerful workers to voluntarily chain themselves to their offices, for tech bosses, this came at a price, because it meant that the workers believed in what they were doing. And if they were ordered to enshitify the products they'd missed their mom's funerals to ship on time, they'd tell their bosses to get stuffed, go over the road, and have a new job with the same or better pay by dinner time. But this was also a trap for tech workers, because tech workers convinced themselves that they weren't really workers at all. They were temporarily embarrassed founders. And so they didn't unionize when they were powerful. And since their power came from scarcity, once the supply caught up with the demand, workers had no power at all, which is why there have been about 500,000 tech worker layoffs in the United States alone since 2023. Meta has just announced a 5% across-the-board redundancy on the same day that they announced that they were doubling their executives' bonuses. This is not a firm that is afraid of its workers anymore. Tech workers once disciplined their bosses, but now tech workers discipline each other, with the knowledge that there's 10 people out there who will do your job if you're not sufficiently pliable. And you combine that threat with the knowledge of how tech bosses treat the workers that aren't scarce, that they can replace, and it becomes very terrifying. Think of Jeff Bezos' delivery drivers who have to wee in bottles because they're not allowed toilet breaks, or the factory workers that Tim Cook employs in China through a subcontractor called Foxconn in a factory called iPhone City, where they had to install suicide nets because so many workers would rather die than face another shift. So tech bosses, they're not afraid of competitors. They're not afraid of regulators. They're certainly not afraid of their workers anymore. But there was one more thing that tech bosses failed, and ironically, it's technology itself. All technology is, after all, in a technical sense, equivalent and universal. The only computer that we know how to build is the kind of computer they knocked up down in Bletchley Park to crack those Nazi ciphers, something called a Turing-complete universal von Neumann machine. This is a calculating engine that can run every valid program, which means that for every inshitifying program that's foisted upon us, there is a disenshittifying program waiting to be written. Not only can we make an Uber-style app that would allow a co-op of drivers and riders who wanted to ride with a co-op find one another, we could do more. We could jailbreak the actual Uber app so that a rider doesn't have to start with the co-op app. They start with the Uber app. They page a ride. If the driver also has the co-op app, they cancel the Uber ride and they rebuild it as a cooperative ride. That means that drivers don't have to wait until there's a critical mass of riders who want the co-op app before it's worth installing the co-op app. And riders don't have to wait until there's a critical mass of co-op drivers before they install the co-op paging app. For every 10-foot fence a tech company puts around its walled garden, there is an 11-foot ladder that Turing-complete computers allow us to build. This source of discipline was hugely important to keeping our tech from inshitifying. Take ad blockers. 51% of all web users have installed an ad blocker, which also protects your privacy. It is the largest consumer boycott in human history. And that means that whenever a tech boss is contemplating a course of action that will make their ads more obnoxious, more invasive, they have to weigh the possibility that many of their users will be so frustrated by this that they type in a search engine, "How do I block ads?" And then the revenue from that user falls to zero and stays at zero forever because no one has ever gone back to the search engine and typed, "How do I start seeing ads again?" But here's the thing. Throughout this century, since 1998, the US Trade Representative has been using the threat of tariffs to get every one of America's trading partners to pass a law called an anti-circumvention law. And this is a law that bans tinkering with, bypassing, or even discussing weaknesses in any kind of digital lock installed at the factory to stop you from modifying how the technology that you use works. In 2001, the European Union caved to the US Trade Representative and gave us Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, which makes it a crime to break digital locks, even for a legal purpose, which means that your property, the devices you paid for, that you rely on, from medical implants to powered wheelchairs, from cars to thermostats, from tractors to smart speakers, from phones to games consoles, cannot be modified by you or repaired by anyone except for the manufacturer's authorized representatives, which means that any enshittification the manufacturer installs at the factory cannot be uninstalled. And the most egregious example of this that we've all experienced is the inkjet printer. Every printer sold by the cartel of 4 or 5 giant inkjet printer companies comes fitted with a software lock that checks to see whether you're using generic ink. And if you are, refuses to use that cartridge. Now, it's not technically challenging to change the software in the printer so it will accept the generic ink, but it is a crime to do so. And that has been the cue for the printer companies to collude to raise and raise and raise the price of ink so that ink now sells for $10,000 a gallon. It is the most expensive fluid a civilian can purchase without a special government permit. And it's why the colored water that you use to print your grocery lists costs more than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. So that is where enshittification comes from. The fourfold collapse of competition, regulation, the power of tech workers, and technology itself. Which raises the question, where will our disenshittification come from? Well, we're going to have to reverse those forces, which may sound daunting, but some of it is already underway. All this decade, we've seen a massive surge in competition law enforcement everywhere. In the United States, under both Trump and Biden, where Google has now been convicted 3 times in 1 year in a federal court of operating an illegal monopoly. And in the UK, where the Competition and Markets Authority and the Digital Markets Unit did some of the world's most important and powerful market studies and investigations under a succession of increasingly dysfunctional Tory leaders. And in the EU, where the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act are abandoning the historic approach of EU tech regulation, where they tried to get tech workers to wield their power more wisely to block hate speech or harassment or copyright infringement. And now what they're doing is making rules not aimed at making the tech workers use their power more wisely, but aimed at taking away the power of tech platforms. It's as though they've realized that the problem isn't that Mark Zuckerberg is the wrong person to be the unelected social media czar for life of 4 billion people's lives all around the world. Rather, that Mark Zuckerberg's job should not exist at all. That we don't need to reform Mark Zuckerberg, we need to abolish Mark Zuckerberg. Antitrust fever has swept Canada, Australia, Germany, Spain, France, South Korea, Japan, and China. And all of this is nothing short of amazing. Because if there's one thing that every political scientist will tell you, it's that the preferences of billionaires are the most reliable predictors of policy outcomes. If billionaires as a class want something, no matter how unpopular it is with all of us, they're going to get it. And if we want something that the oligarchs don't want, it doesn't matter how many of us want it, we will not get our way. This is an iron law of political science. Two American political scientists put it in their 2014 paper in which they analyzed 1,779 policy outcomes. Economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on government policy, while average citizens and mass-based interest groups have little or no influence. And yet here we are, with the US government on the verge of breaking up Google and Meta and whacking Apple with stonking fines. This is a political science miracle. It is pigs flying. It is water flowing uphill. And I think that the reason that this is happening is that people are starting to figure out that we're all fighting on different fronts of the same war. That whether you're in the co-op movement, or the anti-war movement, or the anti-genocide movement, or the climate emergency movement, or the movement for gender minorities and trans rights, that you are in the movement against the policy preferences of the rich and greedy, that you are in a movement for a pluralistic, just, sustainable world built around the needs and thriving of all people. Now, there is precedent for this kind of spontaneous movement forming. Back in the 1970s, before the term ecology came into widespread use, people didn't know that they were on the same side. You care about endangered owls, I care about the ozone layer. Are we still fighting the same fight? What does the destiny of your charismatic nocturnal avians have to do with my preoccupation with the gaseous composition of the upper atmosphere? But one word, ecology, fused 10,000 issues into one movement. And it's happening again. This new Gilded Age, dominated by psychotic oligarchs who are incapable of seeing anyone but themselves as worthy of any moral consideration, is creating a new coalition, a new movement. I'm here today from this anti-big tech part of the movement, the anti-enshittification part of the movement. I've worked for an international digital nonprofits group called the Electronic Frontier Foundation for 23 years, and I helped found a British equivalent, the Open Rights Group. I hope you'll consider learning more and supporting both of them. But the future of tech has to include co-ops. Of course it does. Just as the future of co-ops has to include tech. We are on different fronts, but we are fighting the same war. We are fighting a battle for a digital nervous system that is fit for purpose to help us survive a future of climate emergencies, rolling refugee crises, zoonotic pandemics sparked by habitat loss, people stampeded into xenophobia, racism, misogyny, and transphobia by their worsening economic conditions. Our friends in the finance sector, they have an aphorism they call Stein's Law, and it goes like this: anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. 180 years ago, we had a co-op movement founded right here by people who decided that they weren't going to conduct themselves in the way that everyone that they knew had conducted themselves for as long as they could remember. That kind of movement building, that kind of change, it's not the lost art of a fallen civilization. It's things that people we know have done in living memory. No one's asking us to figure out how to build pyramids without power tools or embalm a pharaoh. We're just doing something that we've had to do periodically through all of recent human history. If we are to build a future that is cooperative, we need digital infrastructure to support cooperation. And together, I think we'll build it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you see the problem that we've got? We need to act strategically. We need to come together with these other organisations, movements, and we need to do something about this. I'm going to invite a panel to join us about some of the things that we're doing in the movement to tackle this already. Quite ironically though, some of our tech hasn't been working this morning, but I'm delighted to say that my Juno translation app is back online for those of you that need translation. This has been developed by a Manchester entrepreneur not quite a co-op yet, but if you see Danny, you might be able to convince him. But it is an inclusive small business that's developed this. So if you need translation, please take a picture of the QR code. Right, so let's see what we can do about this problem that Cory has so eloquently described for us. We've got with us today Croome from Co-Tech, Web Architects and Agile Collective. Give us a wave when I say your name so we know who everybody is. We've got Violetta, a good friend of ours from .co-op and the ICA. We've got Lynne Davis, founder and CEO of Food Data Collaboration. We've got Stephen Gill from Co-op Exchange. We have Maria Young from Agile Collective Co-operative and Open Digital Co-operative. And we have Dominic Kendal-Ward, Group Secretary and General Counsel of Co-op Group. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation. We're trying to get back on time. So if you do have a burning question, make sure Shirley in the blue dress knows, because we'll squeeze a couple of questions in at the end. But if we've not got loads of questions, we'll try and keep on time. So Cory highlights, obviously, there's some very specific problems and what's going on in America. But we've got it all sorted here in the UK, haven't we, Dom? I'm going to come to you because we've got a law commission. Some of the things that Cory talks about, whether that's raising finance or competition law, isn't this what the Law Commission on Cooperative Law is going to address? We've got a plan, haven't we?
Thanks, Rose. Is the microphone working? It is. So, no. There's a short answer, but you know full well I don't really do short answers, and I can't hide the fact that I'm also a lawyer, so I'm going to qualify that. Before I do, and before anybody else gets in there, as an organisation that's obviously very recently suffered a sophisticated and pretty massive cyber attack, the irony is not lost on me that I'm sat on a panel about why are we controlling our own tech. However, I thought I'd get that in before anybody else did. The reality here is that the reason for the qualification is that what the Law Commission is doing is massively welcome and necessary for our movement. What it should be able to do is clarify what is a pretty sparse law that is set somewhere in the 19th century with a few updates and frankly is not fit for purpose, with clarity and with flexibility for co-ops, both for existing co-ops to be able to do what they need to do in removing some blockers and for importantly, startup co-ops. So it is critical. So in that indirect way, it will help. What the scope of it is not to do is to look at competition law. It's not to look at sort of industry-specific regulations. So that is not within the scope of it. That said, and we've had obviously reference to this today, the excitement of a government that supports doubling the size of the movement and the Mutual Cooperatives Business Council. We have a government that is open-minded and has said to us numerous times is open-minded to listen to the ways in which it can assist. So I think that there are opportunities there. But that said, even the parts of this which facilitate, law is not going to de-enshitify big tech. So whatever your legislative framework is and however much that assists or promotes cooperatives, that's not going to get us there. There are a lot of things that we need to do that would get us there, but I'll just touch on two in my mind that are absolutely critical. The first is that we need to be able to advocate and engage our upcoming tech experts on what the cooperative model is. If people do not know that you can set up a cooperative, then they are not going to do so. And that goes equally across lots of industries. But within tech, we know that there are a lot of people who are not wanting to do it just purely because you can make huge amounts of money and control lots of data and be a megalomaniac. So there's the education and advocacy side of it. The other thing is, even with a legislative framework which makes it easier to raise capital, which makes it easier to get investment in, we have investment markets that are very much focused on a capitalist way of thinking. They look to equity and debt leverage ratios, which only really work for companies, don't really work for cooperatives, and they tend to be focused on short-term financial return rather than what we know, and we've heard earlier today, is the huge benefit of co-ops of long-term financial resilience, and which is obviously also appealing to a set of investors. So from that ethical perspective, I think that for me, those are just two of the ways that we should be looking at it. The law will not solve it, although it can assist.
Thank you very much, Dom. So the law's not going to solve it. So again, down to us, the people, to try. One of the reasons I strongly believe this movement needs to get ahead of the curve on this is that tech really lends itself well to co-ops. Those of you familiar with blockchain, which is what crypto is built on, it operates like a co-op. The first block that you make is what we would call our rule book. And then every other block is verification of a truth. It's a governance system. So not only have you got a beautiful foundation to sit on, but there is something called platform co-ops. So just so those of you that may not be familiar, you've all heard of Airbnb, right? The European platform co-op version is called Fairbnb. And not only do you get to rent out your room or buy a room, you get to own the technology it sits on and control it as well. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about platform co-ops. So like I say, no silver bullets, but a lot of people doing some really interesting work in this space, of which I'm going to come to yourself, Lynne, to tell us about your platform co-op and what the opportunities and challenges are that you see.
Thanks. Yeah, great. So I'm working with the Food Data Collaboration, and what we do is build data infrastructure for sustainable food systems. And so before this, I was working with the Open Food Network, which is an international food e-commerce platform co-op. And when we started the Open Food Network, there wasn't really much else in the space for the e-commerce sector, for social enterprises, for this kind of thing. And over the years, that's changed dramatically. Shopify's got really good at that during the pandemic. There were a gazillion different software platforms starting up to serve this sector. And a lot of them were doing it a lot better than we could, right? We were, as a platform co-op, not as resourced as the likes of Shopify. And what we came to realize is that actually, this isn't necessarily a problem. We don't want to be the one platform that rules them all. But what we are doing is thinking about our role as like data infrastructure for co-ops and movements. We were thinking about it all wrong. Because this diversity is a strength, we need diversity in our software platforms, just like we need diversity in our businesses, diversity in our communities, diversity on our fields and on our farms. But with that diversity, it brings a certain set of challenges and problems. You end up with a lot of small businesses that are working in this sector with big overheads, because small businesses don't benefit from the same kinds of economies of scale. In food systems, that's particularly problematic because the conventional sector is so highly optimized. Food is very, very cheap for everybody. And these small businesses also end up in the food sector being blocked from some of the larger distributors out there. So we need diverse small businesses, but we also need to be able to access that scale so that we can bring the prices down and actually feed, everybody wants to feed their families good quality food. So we need to be able to unlock this problem. And so what we came to realize is that data infrastructure can help this. Instead of kind of trying to create a platform, that user-facing thing, let's have lots of platforms that can talk to each other through data infrastructure that is owned by movements. And this data infrastructure can then work with the tools that businesses are already using, like spreadsheets. Maybe it's Shopify, or maybe it's a platform co-op. But we can start to work together collaboratively to build this movement together. And so a data infrastructure can then enable some of those commonalities to link together, inventory, sales ordering, distribution logistics, and you start to get a collaborative space that's able to emerge without asking everybody to change their software onto the same system. And so this is what we're doing. We've just finished 3 years of R&D. We've got a great set of partners around the table, including the Soil Association, Pasture for Life, a lot of the big membership organizations in the sector, a lot of the software platforms we've integrated with Shopify, things like this. We're building out this ecosystem so that we can start to build plugins, tools, and integrations that bit by bit build up this movement of us owning our own tech without having to do it all at once and be as good as the big incumbents. And so in this way, it's a rethink and a re-strategy on how we can actually do that transition into controlling our own tech.
Thank you, Lynne, for the incredible work. I've got so many questions, but we've got so little time, so I'm going to go straight to Maria, because you're attempting to tackle this problem within local government.
Yes, so I'm a member of Agile Collective, which is a worker co-op, a digital website agency. But I'm going to talk about this product that we've been involved in developing called LocalGov Drupal. It began the story for LocalGov Drupal, which is a web publishing platform product, began about 10 years ago when a consultant product owner moved from one council, Brighton and Hove, where he had been working on developing the public-facing website. He then moved over to Croydon Council and started exactly the same thing again, rebuilding this website. And he thought this was madness. Why are we doing this over and over again? Why is every council doing the same thing? Because the platform, the website had been built on an open source project called Drupal, there was, and various other things that had been going on at the time, he had the idea to see whether it was possible to share code between those two councils. And those two councils were really, they got on board and they started this code sharing project. Obviously, they decided to see whether this could scale. So at that point, they applied to the local digital fund, which was a fund through central government, to start a discovery phase, to see whether more councils would be interested in collaborating on this product. They were, turned out. So the first round of funding was for this discovery phase, and at that point, Agile Collective got on board, and we were very involved in that, and then through several other rounds of funding to develop this product, which is now used by, we've got 59 councils who are involved in the project. And a number of suppliers like Agile Collective and other agencies who use this project. The funding from the local digital fund ran out, and so we had to work out how to be independent. Because influenced, I have to say, by Agile Collective as a co-op, we said, let's make it a co-op. Let's form a co-op. So we formed a multi-stakeholder, not-for-profit cooperative. The members are the councils and the suppliers. We have 27 members who own Open Digital Cooperative, which acts as the steward for this project and the community. And it's a booming thing. We're in our third year now, and yeah.
It's fantastic, Maria, because, I mean, how ridiculous is it to even suggest that anyone other than ourselves should own our own public data? And these are the kind of things we need to challenge. We've sleepwalked into, you know, this ownership problem. Great work. V, am I being unfair? Is the movement doing anything? Are we leading in this?
I'm not sure I want to answer that question first. I want to answer the question, can the co-op movement lead it? And the answer is yes, because if you heard Cory, and thank you, Cory, for making me a little bit more depressed than I was already about those issues. But yeah, there is, of course, there's hope, and it's the same as back in the Rochdale Pioneers era. For any problem that the digital capitalism has created, there is a co-op solution. I can go on a list to do like a little comparison table. For example, we have monopolies of big tech and surveillance capitalism. Well, platform co-ops and data commons could potentially resolve that. We have exploitation of gig workers. We have tech worker-owned cooperatives. And indeed, there are large networks of those. One of them is here in the UK, CoTech, and you guys are members of, so you must know. There's another one in Argentina, a very good example. They're called FACTIC. And there's also a global initiative like this of worker cooperatives called Patio, and I would urge you all to explore it, patio.coop. We also have digital capitalism creates centralized infrastructure, of course, for the reasons that Cory touched on. But we do have examples of federated, decentralized, and open source alternatives And some of our panelists have talked about this already. I would mention a co-op that we both know, Chris, Co-op Cycle. And I think they started in France, but they're also in Spain and in 61 other countries, including in Latin America. And it is about worker co-ops, riders for rides for delivery and bicycle deliveries and rides. And they're just using their own federated platform to manage the cooperatives and manage the logistics. And of course, there is always the venture capitalist pressure for profits, right? Like in any other sector in those capitalist businesses. And of course, the difference that co-ops can do there is more ethical, community-based financing. And the funding is really, really crucial indeed in this. But not only. The funding is not the only issue. I think that a bigger issue is what somebody mentioned, that the co-op model is not known enough. So the advocacy of the fact that there is an alternative is something where I think repetitively in a lot of these events that we all go, we hear that that is the problem. And so how can we use tech to create better advocacy for the tools that are more ethical, open source, based on worker co-ops? And so we have been leading the way in some pockets, of course. We've had a namespace for the co-op movement since 2002, but it's so underutilized. So unless we all use it, we're not going to see the value of that. We're also creating a digital directory and a map of the co-op movement, which is using the cooperative principles of autonomy and transparency and open source. But again, we're not using it. So there are these tools, and hopefully this map actually, which is built by a digital cooperative, Digital Commons cooperative, a worker cooperative in the UK, we can hopefully at least map them all out, see what's there, and now let's enable Principle 6 in a digital space. And let's talk to each other and figure out how we can combat some of these problems that Cory raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Vi. And that's a huge call to action. I hope we're having a bit of a wake-up moment here at UK Congress. If you are not on that map, if you're in the UK, go to uk.coop directory, fill in your details. You can go to World Map. We're not even understanding and controlling our whole worldwide tech. We need to get across this, people. Right, I'm looking at you, Chris, now for some actual hope and belief that there are communities out there battling away at this.
There are campaigns against big tech. There's quite a lot out there. The thing I think we're failing with in the cooperative movement is Principle 4, autonomy, when it comes to tech. I very strongly suspect we could count on one hand the number of co-ops in this room that aren't dependent on big tech for some of their internal key infrastructure, be it email, office documents, etc., etc. If we aren't running and owning our own tech, we lose autonomy. And when we're handing this autonomy over to the biggest tech corporations in the world, whose tools they're willingly allowing to be used to target people for extermination in Gaza, and so on and so forth, we need to do better than this. Violetta mentioned Co-op Cycle. They're very interesting because they use a software code base that it's not only open source, it's actually to the left of open source. It's software that can only be used by co-ops. I'm all in favor of us using open source software, but we need to use open source software that enforces sharing. Big tech corporations have built their empires on open source software. The open source software they love is permissively licensed software. This is software that has a license that allows you to privatize that software, to take it out of common ownership, to turn it into a proprietary product. If we use copyleft software, the most famous license being for which is the GPL, which is used by the Linux kernel, that software that the license for which enforces sharing, that software has to be shared. You can't use it and not share changes you make to it, improvements you make to it. So we as a movement, we need to be embracing and using cooperative software rather than proprietary software. We need to be moving away from our dependence on big tech. As mentioned earlier, my co-ops and Agile are both part of a UK network of tech co-ops called CoTech. Our website's at cotech.uk. We've recently rebranded it. We're running a session after this in the Bright Hall, which is upstairs and over there, to discuss how cooperatives can do better with tech and how we can reduce our dependence on big tech and what we can do to make things better.
Amazing and great plug there, Chris. Cory will be back with us shortly to sum up. But Stephen, I'm looking to you because you know what one of the real challenges is this venture capital money that ploughs money into big tech, and that's not something that we can do. So, any suggestions?
Yes, vast amounts of cash would be helpful. So that would be fantastic. No. But I think, but seriously, to be able to compete with what Cory was talking about there, and I do want to challenge him on a couple of points, but I'll wait for him to come back on that. But we need proper funding to be able to do that, in my very humble opinion. And in my years in the co-op sector, I've met some amazing cooperators and amazing technical cooperators, and a lot of them are burnt out, because there's a reliance or an expectation on sweat equity, and I think we need to have that conversation. Let's properly finance in order to be able to take this on. But it's not just about money, I think it's about runway as well. So we mentioned about getting rid of a lot of tech jobs in the US, and yes, that happens because it's short-termism. They don't care about the people that work for them. So they'll take them on, give them big wages, and then 6 months later they're gone. So that's not what we're about. So we need to think about money that gives you runway to build the thing that you're trying to build, in my opinion. So just on the evil point, my brother actually used to work for Google in their X division. Now, I was going to say that my brother's not evil, but actually when I was 5 years old, I thought he was pretty evil. So perhaps maybe Cory's onto something. But no, I went in to visit him and his colleagues for lunch one day, and some of the brightest minds on the planet working on AI and hardware. And they asked what I do, and I explained what co-ops were. And literally, you could hear a pin drop, the silence in the room. Like, what? So you're saying we could actually do what we're doing, the great work that we're doing, and we could help humanity instead of Wall Street? And their minds were blown. So we've got a real job here to get that message out. And I think we need to emphasize about one of my passions, which is dignity of work. You know, these are not all bad people that work for these organizations. They would love to work for a co-op and fix that problem. But personally, I think the only way we're going to achieve that is having the conversation around capital. And I was at a conference in Rome in 2022 where a few of the big fund managers talked, mutual fund managers, and they pointed out they own Google, they own Facebook. And it's not through choice, it's because these are the opportunities that they have to invest, and they need to invest for the behalf of their members and make a return. So if there's another way, if there's an alternative, if we can marry what we're doing in the co-op world with perhaps the mutual world, and I call it the pension funds, that could be an opportunity. And there's big money there. Trillions of dollars sitting in pension funds, and the projection is by 2032, that figure to rise to $130 trillion. So if we can tap into that in some way, I think we should definitely have that conversation. And co-ops, in my opinion, are the natural home for ESG. And I know ESG is not a word sometimes that's banded around too much now, but I still stand by that. And the top 5 ESG investments are the ones that Cory mentioned: Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Tesla. It's crazy. So why can't we pour some of that money into the co-op sector? Dom here knows we've had this conversation. I did a master's in co-ops, and my final paper was on pensions and cooperatives and how we can contribute to the cooperative economy. There's 665 million that we put into pensions every year in the co-op sector. Almost all of that ends up in Microsoft and Apple and so forth, and maybe we could look to change that. So just to complete, I do want to point out something. A lot of you will be aware of the statement, the cooperative identity and the review that's going through, and I want to quote just a couple of very quick things here. Principle 3 reminds us that members allocate surpluses not just for their own benefit, but to strengthen their cooperative and shared goals. And Principle 7 calls us to act in service of community, and this is the new bit, and to work towards a peaceful, just, and sustainable future. So if our members want to honor those principles by building a better organization, a better business, a better co-op, one that serves people, and by helping millions around the world save for a dignified retirement, then the capital we need becomes available on values-aligned terms and at scale. And if we can do that, we're not just going to build platforms, we're transferring the cooperative economy. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Stephen. Okay, we're just going to squeeze two questions in before we go to our break. First one is over here.
Hi, Paul Robinson from National Members Council of Co-op Group. Thank you very much for that panel. There are so many open, ethical, federated alternatives to the big tech platforms that you talked about. And a quick plug for social.coop. If you're looking for a cooperatively owned social media platform, social.coop on Mastodon, fantastic place to be. How do we solve the discoverability problem to allow people to find alternatives to those big tech platforms that you mentioned in your talk, Cory?
Shall I take that? I think I'm mic'd. Maybe I'm double mic'd now. So I dispute very slightly that the problem is discovery. I think people, obviously not everyone knows about Mastodon, social.coop and so on. I think the real problem is what our economist friends call switching costs. That, you know, you're on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you are now because you love the people who are there more than you hate the people who own those services. And leaving behind Twitter or Facebook comes at a very high cost. Now, there are ways technology can resolve this cost. So I mentioned before that Facebook opened to the general public at a time when everyone was using MySpace, and they offered them a better experience by promising them more privacy. But obviously there's a limit to how many times you can just go and hang out on the newly opened Facebook and read their lovely privacy policy while you wait for your dumb friends to join you. And so instead, what Facebook did was it created a scraper, a bot. And you gave that bot your login and password. It would go to MySpace several times a day, pretending to be you. It would grab everything your friends had posted there for you to see, put it in your Facebook feed, and you could reply to it, and it would push it back out again. It's not technically challenging to do that to Facebook or Twitter today, but you know, when they did it to us, that was progress. If we do it to them, that's piracy. Article 6 of the Copyright Directive makes it a crime. Now, I said in passing that Article 6 of the Copyright Directive and laws like it all around the world were passed because the US Trade Representative said, unless you pass a law like this, America's going to put tariffs on your goods. So happy Liberation Day, everyone. We no longer need these laws. The threat has already been realized. This is an opportunity for us to ease people's passage out of every kind of tech monopoly silo, and moreover, to consume the monopoly rents that they've accumulated as a way of creating a new industrial tech center in the countries that they've been exploiting, to use that monopoly rent as a kind of jet fuel for like a disposable rocket stage to push other tech sectors into a stable orbit that will compete with tech, with American tech by delivering things people want instead of things that those firms' shareholders want.
Thank you. And just squeeze in one more question in before we finish from the main room. Thank you.
Ian Hewitt from East Midlands Cooperatives, and I'm told I'm an ambassador, so I've got to be careful what I say. I'm also the climate officer for Knott's Trades Council and involved in something called New Lucas Plan. So Trebor Schultz and Nathan Schneider established the platform co-op movement, and some of us in the co-op lobbied them to work more closely with cooperative values and principles. And I got an email from Richard Stallman, who was also part of that group, who said he thought that cooperative values and principles kind of looked all right to him. He's kind of a bit of a philosopher and the founder of open source, GPL, that Chris talked to. Now, the downside, oh yeah, Trebor Schultz has just convened a conference in Turkey, which is developed an international conference on cooperative AI and what that might mean. So maybe we should look at that. I think we're in serious trouble because under Doge, Palantir, this wonderful software organization that Cory didn't mention and is now embedded in the NHS, has linked together the big databases in the US state and are looking to get rid of, basically, democracy. So I think we're in serious trouble, as Cory mentioned. In 1936 and 1938, the co-op movement convened cooperative pageants, one in Wembley, one in Manchester, where over 60,000 people turned up to celebrate cooperation in the face of insurgent fascism. I think we need something similar today to get people out and on side. Thank you.
There was a question in there, was there?
Okay, so that's fine, Shirley. We're going to go straight to, I'm just concerned with the time. And what, we did ask Trebo to join us today and he was unavailable. We've started, I'm sure you're all thinking and you've all got lots and lots of questions. So these guys are going to be around for the break and we are going to move to the break now. But for now, can we have a huge round of applause for our panel? If you would like to continue the conversation and be part of the solution, as Chris said after the break, there's a breakout session in the Bright Hall where you can speak with John, Rob and the team about what's next for owning our tech and come up with some solutions. We're going to have a 30-minute refreshment break, so can you please be back in here by midday promptly so that we can get back on time. So in the council chamber, the premieres, a Changemakers documentary will be running at that time, along with aroundtheworld.coop. Thank you.
Hi, Ruth. That was a wonderful panel.